Daniel Harper had lived through many hard seasons, but the winter that approached now felt heavier than any before. The cold wind cut through his coat when he stepped outside, and the sky seemed to warn him that a dangerous blizzard was coming. He was a widower in his early 30s, with 2 small children who depended on him for everything. His wife had passed away the year before, and ever since, life had felt like a long, difficult climb uphill. Every chore took twice the effort, and every night felt longer than the last. Still, he woke up early each morning, trying to keep the homestead running. He chopped firewood until his hands shook. He fed the animals, even when the cold made his fingers numb. He tried to cook for his children, even though he barely had the strength. The little cabin always felt too quiet. And sometimes he would look at the old rocking chair where his wife used to sit, and a hollow ache would settle in his chest. But he pushed through, because his children needed him. Months earlier, before winter came, Daniel had made a decision he never thought he would make. He had reached out to a mail-order bride agency. It wasn't an easy choice. It felt strange to think about bringing a new woman into his home, a place still filled with memories. But he needed help, and his children needed a mother's care. Loneliness had been breaking him down, day after day, and he knew he couldn't keep going like this. Through the agency, he began exchanging letters with a woman named Lydia. She lived far back east, in a town filled with noise and people, the opposite of Daniel's quiet frontier life. Her letters were gentle and thoughtful. She wrote about her simple wishes, peace, a family, a home where she felt needed. She talked about how she loved children, how she dreamed of a place where she could grow roots. Daniel found comfort in her honesty. Slowly, a bond formed through ink and paper. She never promised him perfection, only effort, kindness, and an honest heart. But even with all their letters, Daniel still felt nervous. What if she hated the rough frontier life? What if the children didn't accept her? What if he wasn't ready to care for someone again? These thoughts stayed with him every day, growing louder as the date of her arrival came closer. The morning Lydia was supposed to arrive, the wind started picking up. Snow began falling early, and by noon, the sky looked like it was full of swirling white sand. Daniel rode into town by wagon to wait for the stagecoach. The children stayed with a neighbor because the cold was too dangerous for them. Daniel stood on the wooden platform outside the station, pulling his coat tight and watching the road. The station master shook his head and said the storm might delay the coach. Hours passed. Snow thickened. The wind howled like a warning. Daniel's worry grew. The stagecoach was nowhere in sight. Finally, when the snow was falling so hard that Daniel could barely see a few feet ahead, the station master stepped out with a lantern and called to him. "Harper." The coach turned back. They said the trail was too dangerous. They couldn't make it through. 1954. 1954 my 9. 1954. Daniel felt something sink inside him. If the coach had turned back, then what about Lydia? He had no way of knowing if she had found shelter or if she was stranded somewhere on the road. The thought of her alone in this weather made his stomach twist. She had come so far, hoping for a new beginning. He couldn't stand the idea of her being lost in a storm she didn't understand. He returned home slowly, frightened and unsure. The snow was already deep enough to slow his horse, and the wind whipped against his face. By the time he reached the cabin, the world outside was almost invisible under the white sheets falling from the sky. He checked on his children again, making sure their blankets were warm and the fire was strong. But his mind was somewhere else on Lydia, wherever she might be. Inside Lydia's own story, things had taken a frightening turn as well. When the coach had stopped miles away from Daniel's homestead, the driver had told everyone they had to turn back. But Lydia refused. She had come too far. She had spent all her savings on this journey, and Daniel's last letter had said he would be waiting. She didn't want him to think she changed her mind or lost her courage. She insisted she could walk the last stretch. The driver tried to talk her out of it, but the trail wasn't too long, and she believed she could make it before the storm grew worse. So she stepped out into the cold with her small suitcase, her coat pulled tight around her, and determination pushing her through the wind. But the blizzard arrived faster than she expected. Snow slapped against her face. The wind pushed her sideways. Her boots sank deep into the ground with every step. She kept thinking of Daniel's letters, the way he spoke gently about his children, the hope she felt when she imagined her new life. Those thoughts kept her moving, even when her legs weakened. By the time she saw the faint outline of a cabin in the distance, she was trembling from exhaustion. Her breath came out in painful gasps. She felt like she might collapse right there in the snow. But she pushed herself up the steps and knocked weakly on the door. Inside, Daniel heard the faint sound. For a moment, he thought he imagined it. Nobody would be outside in a storm like this. But when the knock came again, he hurried to open the door. The moment the door swung open, the wind burst inside, and Lydia stumbled forward. Her hair was wet, her cheeks red from the freezing air, and her clothes were covered in snow. Daniel caught her before she could fall. For a second, he could barely speak. He had pictured her in his mind through all their letters, but seeing her like this cold, exhausted, and brave enough to walk through a blizzard left him shocked and overwhelmed. "You're Lydia," he said quietly, supporting her weight. She nodded weakly, shivering. I tried to make it. I didn't want you to think I gave up. She nodded weakly. I climbed Tronger 17. She nodded weakly. I didn't want you to think I gave up. Daniel gently helped her inside and closed the door against the storm. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her like a blanket. The children, half asleep under their quilts, lifted their heads and watched with wide, curious eyes. Daniel set Lydia near the fire and quickly grabbed extra blankets. He removed her wet gloves and rubbed her cold hands until they began to warm. He brought her a cup of warm broth and made sure she sipped it slowly. She kept apologizing for the trouble, but Daniel shook his head each time. "You came all this way," he said softly. "You didn't have to walk through a storm like this. I would never think less of you." Lydia's eyes softened at his words. Even though she was tired and freezing, she felt strangely safe near him. His children watched her with shy curiosity. Lydia smiled gently at them, and the little girl smiled back, as if reassured. The storm raged outside, making the windows shake. But inside the small cabin, there was warmth, light, and an unexpected sense of peace. Daniel made a small bed for Lydia near the fire so she could rest and stay warm. As she lay down, she heard the sound of the wind, but it no longer frightened her. Daniel watched her for a moment, grateful she had made it. Her courage amazed him. He felt something shift quietly in his heart, something he didn't quite understand yet. Lydia closed her eyes, not out of fear but comfort. She had reached the home she hoped for, even in the middle of a storm. And Daniel, sitting quietly nearby, felt the first spark of hope he had felt in a long, long time. The storm did not calm when morning arrived. Instead, it grew stronger, pounding against the cabin walls, as if nature itself wanted to test everyone inside. Daniel woke early, long before the children stirred, and checked the fire. Lydia was still asleep near the hearth, wrapped in blankets, her face soft and peaceful after the exhausting journey she had made. Daniel watched her for a moment, realizing how close she had come to collapsing in the snow. A few more minutes outside, and things could have gone terribly wrong. He stood up quietly, trying not to disturb her. He had animals to check on and chores to finish, even if the storm made everything harder. The cold air hit him like a slap the moment he stepped outside. Snow had piled up against the door, and the wind almost pushed him back, but he forced himself forward, worrying about the livestock out in the barn. Without them, his family could not survive winter. He fought his way through the deep snow, leaning forward so the wind wouldn't knock him over. Every breath burned his lungs. When he finally reached the barn, he was relieved to see the animals were still alive, but the roof creaked under the weight of snow. He started clearing it as fast as he could, knowing the roof might collapse if too much weight built up. Inside the cabin, Lydia woke to the sound of the wind howling. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the cabin walls, the small window, the gentle glow of the fire. She pushed herself up slowly, still sore from her long walk through the storm. When she didn't see Daniel, worry pricked her stomach. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and checked on the children, who were still asleep, curled together like small kittens trying to stay warm. A cold draft brushed her ankles. The door was slightly open. Daniel must have gone out. Lydia frowned. The storm was too strong for anyone to be out alone. Fear tightened her chest. She put on her shoes, wrapped herself in Daniel's spare coat, and stepped outside. The wind immediately pushed against her. But the thought of Daniel alone drove her onward. She followed the faint tracks he had left in the snow until she reached the barn. When she pushed the door open, she saw him struggling to lift a heavy shovel full of snow, his breathing harsh and his face pale from the cold. "Daniel!" she shouted, her voice almost swallowed by the storm. He turned sharply, surprised to see her. "Lydia! You shouldn't be out here. It's too dangerous. So is you being out here alone?" She replied, stepping closer. "Please, let me help." Daniel shook his head. "You're still tired from yesterday. Go back inside. You need to stay warm." Lydia didn't move. "If something happens to you, what will your children do? What will any of us do?" Lime. Her words struck him hard. She was right. He had been pushing himself too much since his wife passed away, trying to carry everything alone. He took a slow breath and nodded. "Fine," he said softly. "But stay close to me." Together, they cleared the snow from the roof and fed the animals. Lydia was careful, but determined. Her hands grew red from the cold, and her legs trembled from the effort. Yet she never complained. She kept glancing at Daniel, making sure he wasn't overstraining himself. Whenever he staggered, she steadied him. Whenever he stopped to catch his breath, she stayed nearby. By the time they finished, Daniel looked exhausted. His breaths came out in short bursts, and he leaned against the barn wall for support. Lydia hurried to him, placing a steady hand on his arm. "You're not well," she whispered, concerned. "I'm just tired," he said, but his voice was shaky. "Then let's go inside," she insisted gently. He didn't argue this time. The walk back to the cabin felt much longer than before. Snow reached up to their knees, and the wind blew so hard that Lydia had to shield Daniel with her own body at times. When they finally made it through the door, Daniel nearly collapsed. Lydia caught him and helped him sit near the fire. His children woke up, rubbing their eyes. They stared in confusion as Lydia removed Daniel's snow-soaked coat and knelt beside him with a worried expression. "Papa," the little girl whispered. Daniel tried to smile reassuringly, but he looked pale. His forehead felt warm, too warm. Lydia pressed her hand gently to his cheek. He shook his head stubbornly. "I'll be fine." "No," she said firmly, in a gentle but confident tone. "You need rest. Let me take care of things for now." 40. Rested. Daniel wanted to argue, but he was too tired. His body ached, and his vision blurred slightly. He nodded weakly, allowing Lydia to guide him to his bed. She covered him with blankets and placed a warm cloth on his forehead. The children stood near her, worry written on their small faces. Lydia crouched down to their level and gave them a warm, reassuring smile. "Your papa just needs rest," she told them softly. "We'll look after him, all right?" The little girl nodded slowly, her eyes shining with uncertainty. Lydia spent the next hours boiling water, preparing warm soup and keeping the fire alive. She checked Daniel's fever regularly, bringing him sips of water and making sure he stayed warm. Sometimes he opened his eyes and tried to thank her, but she shook her head each time. "You saved me first," she whispered once. "Now it's my turn." The children stayed close to Lydia, helping in small ways. The boy gathered firewood from inside the cabin. The girl handed Lydia cloths and bowls. Slowly, they began to trust her. By evening, the storm still roared, but the inside of the cabin felt safe. Lydia sat beside Daniel, wiping his forehead gently. His breathing had steadied a little, though the fever remained. He opened his eyes and looked at her, gratitude shining behind his tired gaze. "You shouldn't have gone out there," he murmured weakly. "You shouldn't have either," she replied softly. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're braver than I expected." She blushed slightly, lowering her eyes. "I've had a hard life too. It teaches you to be strong." He studied her quietly, seeing her in a different light. She wasn't just the woman from the letters. She wasn't just a stranger seeking a new life. She was someone who stepped into danger without hesitation. Someone who protected his children as if they were already her own. Someone who refused to let him face the world alone. The children curled up near the fire, watching the flames dance. Lydia continued to sit beside Daniel, making sure he stayed warm and tended to. She stayed awake long after the children fell asleep, afraid to close her eyes in case his fever worsened. The cabin was quiet, except for the crackling wood and the storm outside. At one point in the night, Daniel woke again. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to face all this on your first day," he said. Lydia shook her head. "I chose to walk through the storm to be here, and I don't regret it." He looked at her, surprised. She nodded. "I came here hoping for a home, hoping for a place where I was needed. Today showed me that I made the right choice." Daniel's heart softened. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time. No one had looked at him with that kind of sincerity. Without meaning to, he reached for her hand. Lydia hesitated for a second, then gently placed her hand in his. His fingers were warm now, not burning with fever, nor cold from the storm, just warm enough to hold. They stayed like that in silence, two people who came from different worlds but had already faced hardship together. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, but inside the small cabin, an unspoken bond began to grow quiet, steady, and full of hope. Lydia realized that this home, though worn and weathered, held the comfort she had always longed for. And Daniel, drifting into sleep once more, understood that he didn't have to carry his burdens alone anymore. Not when someone as strong and caring as Lydia had walked through a storm just to be by his side. The storm finally began to weaken the next morning. The wind still howled around the cabin, but the heavy pounding on the walls had slowed. Pale light pushed through the frosted window, giving the room a soft glow. Lydia opened her eyes, realizing she had fallen asleep, sitting beside Daniel's bed. Her neck was stiff, but she didn't mind. Daniel's fever had lowered during the night, and that was all that mattered. She checked his forehead gently. His skin felt cooler than before. Relief washed over her. Daniel was strong, but even strong men had limits. She looked at his sleeping face, noticing how tired he still seemed. His life had been full of struggle, ever since his wife passed away. Lydia didn't know all the details, but she could see the weight of it in the lines near his eyes and the way he always pushed himself too hard. The children were still asleep on the other side of the cabin, curled under blankets. Lydia quietly stood, stretched her sore muscles, and went to prepare breakfast. She moved carefully so she wouldn't disturb anyone. She stoked the fire, boiled water, and began cooking a simple meal of porridge and warm biscuits. The smell slowly filled the cabin, making it feel even more comforting. When the children woke up, they found Lydia at the stove, offering them warm bowls with a gentle smile. They ate sleepily, glancing often at their father. Lydia noticed their worry and reassured them softly. "He's getting better," she promised. "He just needs a little more rest." The little girl leaned against Lydia's arm, something she had never done before. Lydia didn't move away. She gently stroked the child's hair, feeling a warm ache in her heart. It was a new feeling, like she belonged there, as if she was already part of their family. She had longed for this kind of closeness her entire life. After breakfast, Lydia cleaned the cabin, swept the floor, organized the shelves, and washed the few clothes Daniel hadn't had time to handle. Every task she completed made the space feel brighter, calmer, more cared for, like a true home. She noticed the children watching her from time to time, studying her quietly. They seemed to be measuring how safe, how gentle, and how steady she was. Daniel opened his eyes around midday. His head felt heavy, but he could focus now. When he turned slightly, he saw Lydia folding blankets near the window, sunlight outlining her figure. For a long moment, he just watched her. She moved with purpose, but also with a softness that warmed the room. Her presence was like a quiet strength, something his life had been missing for too long. She glanced back and noticed he was awake. Immediately, she set down the blankets and walked to him. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," he admitted. "But better than before." She checked his forehead again. "Your fever is almost gone." Daniel tried to sit up, but she gently pressed a hand on his shoulder. "Not too much. Take it slow." He smiled faintly. "You're already sounding like you've lived here for years." Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I just want to help." "And you have," Daniel said softly. "More than you know." The children rushed to their father's side, their faces full of relief. Daniel hugged them gently, whispering reassuring words. Lydia stepped back, letting them have their moment as a family. But inside her heart, she wondered if there was a place for her in that little circle of arms and warmth. Over the next few days, the storm finally passed. Snow still covered the land in deep layers, but the sky cleared, and the air calmed. Daniel slowly regained his strength. Lydia kept encouraging him to rest, but he insisted on doing small chores, wanting to rebuild his stamina. He would step outside to chop a bit of wood, and Lydia would stand at the doorway with her arms crossed lightly, reminding him not to push himself too hard. If he swayed even a little, she was at his side instantly. The children giggled at this new dynamic, watching their father pretend he wasn't being carefully monitored by the gentle woman they were starting to trust. Inside the cabin, Lydia brought life into every corner. She taught the children simple songs, braided the little girl's hair, mended torn clothes, and organized the pantry so everything had a place. Daniel noticed how the cabin felt different now, not just cleaner, but warmer, filled with laughter he hadn't heard in months. One evening, after the children went to bed, Daniel sat by the fire while Lydia washed the dishes. The fire crackled softly, and the quiet between them felt warm, not uncomfortable. Daniel finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You've done so much here," he said. "I didn't expect all of this." Lydia set down a plate and turned to him. "You needed help, and the children needed someone who could be here for them." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's true. But you've given more than help. You've given this place peace. I haven't seen my children laugh like that since before." Lydia softened at his words. "They're good children. They were just waiting for someone to fill the empty spaces." Daniel looked into the fire, his voice quiet. "I was waiting too, I suppose. I just didn't realize it." Lydia felt her chest tighten gently. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what would be appropriate. Instead, she returned to her task, unsure of how to express the emotions in her heart. Days continued, and the bond between them deepened without needing to be spoken aloud. Daniel began seeking Lydia's opinion on small things: how to arrange shelves, what to cook, which chores to prioritize. He found himself caring about her comfort, asking if she was warm enough, if she needed rest, if she felt settled. Lydia noticed these small gestures and treasured them quietly. One afternoon, when the sun shone over the snow, Daniel decided they should take a short walk outside. He wanted the children to get fresh air, and Lydia to see more of the land she had traveled so far to reach. He showed them the stream behind the property, the old apple tree waiting for spring, and the wide field where flowers would bloom when winter ended. Lydia listened to him describe the land with quiet admiration. Daniel spoke with a deep familiarity, as if the land was part of his heart. She realized he had built this life with his own hands, through sweat and hardship. It made her respect him even more. As they stood near the frozen stream, the little girl slipped on a patch of ice. Lydia reacted instantly, catching her before she fell. Daniel watched the moment closely, Lydia holding the child gently, whispering in her ear, calming her fears. It was such a natural gesture, filled with tenderness, that Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not just gratitude, something warmer, something hopeful. That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel lingered by the fire while Lydia prepared tea. The flames flickered softly, painting their shadows on the cabin walls. Lydia handed him a warm cup and sat across from him. "Lydia," Daniel began, his voice careful. She looked up, waiting quietly. "When you walked through that storm, you didn't just save yourself, you saved us too." Lydia swallowed gently, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "I only did what felt right." Daniel shook his head. "Most people wouldn't have done that. And since you arrived," the children smile again, "the house feels alive. And he paused, searching for the right words. "I'm not afraid of the future, the way I used to be." Lydia's breath caught slightly. "I'm glad if I've helped in any way." He met her gaze fully. "You've helped more than you know." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two souls who had crossed great distances, carrying heavy pasts, meeting now in a quiet room, warmed by fire. The silence between them felt full, not empty. Lydia lowered her eyes shyly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She felt something unfamiliar, something soft and bright growing inside her, a feeling she hadn't known she was capable of having again. Daniel wanted to reach across the space and take her hand, but he held back. Not yet. Not until she knew his heart clearly. Not until he understood hers. But he knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a mail-order bride anymore. She was becoming the center of the home, the comfort of the children, the light that had returned to the cabin. And without saying the words aloud, Daniel realized he had begun to hope for a future where she would stay, where this quiet warmth between them would grow into something neither of them had dared dream about. The snow slowly began to melt in the following weeks. Each morning, more sunlight slipped through the window, warming the wooden floorboards and filling the cabin with a gentle glow. The land that had been buried under thick layers of white now revealed earth, stones, and the first hints of early spring grass. Birds began to return, bringing soft chirping that made the children press their faces against the window with excitement. Daniel felt stronger each day. The fever was gone, his strength returning little by little. He could chop wood again without losing his breath, walk to the barn without stumbling, and help with chores that Lydia had been handling on her own during his illness. But even as he regained his health, one thing did not change: Lydia's presence by his side. She moved around the home with ease now, as if she'd been part of it all her life. The children grew especially attached to her. They followed her everywhere, asking her to braid their hair, read them stories, or help them practice writing their names. They called her gently when they woke up from naps, or whenever they were frightened by loud winds at night. Lydia answered every call, with patience, kindness, and a warm smile. One early morning, Daniel stepped outside with a bucket of feed for the animals. The sun was still low, coloring the sky with shades of pink and soft gold. As he walked past the window, he paused. Inside the cabin, Lydia was helping the children get dressed. She laughed softly at something the little girl said, her expression glowing with affection. The sight warmed Daniel so deeply that he stood there for several moments, forgetting about the cold air around him. A quiet thought settled inside him, one that had been growing for weeks. He didn't just admire her. He needed her. Not as a helper, not as a mail-order bride fulfilling a promise, but as someone he truly wanted in his life. But Daniel was a careful man. He didn't want to push Lydia into anything. He didn't want her to feel obligated or pressured. She had already given so much simply by being there. He wanted to be sure she was truly happy, and that her heart felt at home on his land, with his children, with him. Later that day, Lydia baked fresh bread while Daniel worked in the barn. The warm smell drifted through the house, reminding him of a life he once had but thought he could never have again. When he returned to the cabin, she was setting the table with neat hands, humming softly. The children raced toward him, hugging his legs happily, and Lydia turned with a smile that reached her eyes. "Dinner's ready," she said gently. Daniel felt something stir inside him again. He watched her pour milk for the children, serve them bread, and cut their food into tiny pieces. She didn't do these things because she had to. She did them because she cared. After dinner, Daniel stepped outside for fresh air. Lydia came out a few minutes later to hang damp clothes on the line. The sky was painted in soft blue, and the first evening stars twinkled faintly above. She stood quietly beside him, holding a cloth in her hands. "You're getting stronger," she said calmly. "I am," he replied. Then he glanced toward her. "Because of you." Lydia lowered her eyes. "I'm glad I could help." Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say more, but his words stuck somewhere in his chest. "You've made this place feel alive again," Daniel finally managed, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't realize how quiet it had become until you were here." Lydia looked up at him, her expression gentle. "I felt the same. I didn't know how lonely I was until I came here." Her voice carried something fragile, something honest. Daniel turned fully toward her, noticing the warmth in her eyes. Before he could speak further, the children called from inside. Lydia smiled softly and went back in, leaving Daniel standing under the faint evening glow. The next day, the sun shone brighter than it had in weeks. Snow melted in small rivers along the fields. Daniel decided they should go to town for supplies now that the roads were opening again. Lydia dressed the children warmly, and they all climbed into the wagon. The journey felt different now, not like a duty, but like a small adventure shared between a growing family. In town, several neighbors greeted Daniel warmly. They noticed Lydia walking beside him, with the children close to her. Some nodded approvingly. Others smiled knowingly. Lydia felt shy under the attention. But Daniel walked proudly, as if he wanted everyone to see she was with him. They visited the general store, the blacksmith, and then the church hall, where a community gathering was underway. People introduced themselves to Lydia, asking about her journey and her new life. Daniel stayed close to her, guiding her gently with his presence. Every time she looked uncertain, he offered a small, reassuring smile that steadied her. The children clung to Lydia's hands, showing clearly who they trusted. When they returned home, the ride felt peaceful. Lydia watched the wide landscape, breathing in the cold air, with a feeling of belonging she didn't want to lose. That evening, when the children were asleep, the cabin quiet, and the fire glowing warmly, Daniel finally acted on what had been in his heart for weeks. He approached Lydia while she was folding blankets. "Lydia," he began, his voice steady but tender. "I need to ask you something." She set the blanket down and looked at him curiously. "I want to know if you're happy here," he said. Lydia's breath caught. "I am," she answered softly. This place, this family, it feels like home. Daniel's eyes warmed. I'm glad you feel that way, because I've wanted to ask you something important, but I needed to be sure you wanted to be here. She stepped closer without realizing it, drawn by the quiet emotion in his voice. Lydia, I would like you to stay. Not because of an agreement or a letter, but because He paused, gathering courage. Because I care for you. And the children care for you. You've filled a place in this home that I didn't think could ever be filled again. Lydia's eyes glistened, her heart beating fast. She had dreamed of belonging somewhere, of being loved and needed. And now, those dreams were standing in front of her, speaking her name with sincerity. I want to stay, she whispered. I've wanted that since the first morning I woke up here. Daniel exhaled slowly, deeply relieved. He took her hand gently, not rushing, giving her time. Lydia's fingers closed around his, with quiet certainty. I would like us to build a life together, he said. A real one. As partners. As a family. Tears welled in her eyes. But they were tears of joy, not sadness. Yes, she said softly. With all my heart. Yes. He pulled her into a warm embrace, careful and respectful, holding her as if she were the missing piece he had been searching for. The children woke early the next morning to find Lydia and Daniel preparing breakfast together. The sight made them giggle with excitement. Lydia knelt and hugged them gently, whispering that she would stay with them for good. Their little faces lit up with pure happiness. Weeks later, when spring spread across the land and flowers bloomed on the hillside, Daniel and Lydia held a simple wedding on their property. Neighbors gathered. The children carried small baskets of wildflowers, and the open sky watched over them like a blessing. Daniel took Lydia's hands and spoke vows shaped by honesty and devotion. Lydia answered with a voice full of hope and love. That day, the cabin was filled with laughter, warmth, and new beginnings. Over time, Lydia became not only a wife to Daniel and a mother to his children, but a beloved member of the community. She planted a garden, taught the children their lessons, and filled the home with music, peace, and gentle joy. And Daniel, once a lonely widower facing a brutal winter, found himself living a life he never thought he would have again. A home filled with love, children who grew up happy and safe, and a woman who had crossed a blizzard to reach him and stayed to build a future neither of them had dared dream. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was full, honest, warm, strong, just like the love that had grown between them, beginning in the fiercest storm and lasting through every season that followed.